Okay, and welcome back to Principles of Micro with James Bland. This is where we started on my previous video on market efficiency, and I'll just give you a very brief catch-up of what we were doing, and then get into the third of the three problems that I've given our benevolent social planner. Okay, so just a minute, I got my screen organized in the wrong place. That's better for me, and hopefully you don't notice anything differently. Anyway, so we're trying to maximize total surplus here, okay? And so this is what the market does, right? The market achieves a total surplus that's equal to the area between the supply and the demand curves. For some reason I've lost my horizontal axis here. Let's put that in again. And to the left of the equilibrium quantity. Okay, but let's suppose we don't have a market to do this. But we have a benevolent social planner who can choose quantity, and their goal is to maximize total surplus. So I've split this problem up into three separate problems. And the first one is if I told you the quantity, who should produce it, right? If you were to force people to produce or not produce, what would be the most efficient way to do it, right? This is achieving production efficiency. And the answer to this one is to minimize the cost of producing. What you want to do is to make the producers with the lowest marginal cost produce the good, okay? And this is what markets do anyway, okay? And so then, looking ahead, well, let's do this on the demand side. If we've produced this quantity, who should we give it to maximize the total value of that allocation? And, well, what we want to do is to give it to consumers who have the highest marginal value. And again, this is what markets do on their own anyway. Okay, so now we're going to get to our third problem. And that is what is the quantity that maximizes total surplus? Okay, so once we've answered this question, that's the quantity we want to pick, and then we know that we need to get the lowest marginal cost producers to produce the item and give those items to the highest marginal value buyers, consumers, right? Okay, so this is the third part of this three-part problem. Okay, so let's get back to our supply and demand diagram, which is really, for this problem, our marginal cost and marginal value diagram, right? So that we don't have a supply curve and a demand curve because we're this benevolent social planner, and we're trying to allocate production and consumption in the most efficient way possible, okay? But even in this situation, whoops, excuse me, even in this situation, we can still work out what our total surplus is. Okay, so let's start out with picking picking a quantity and seeing what total surplus would be if we chose that quantity. Okay, so I'm going to call this Q1. Okay, it's explicitly not the equilibrium quantity. And we know that from our first two thought experiments that if I wanted to allocate this, or if I wanted to allocate production to make this quantity, what I'd want to do is to get these producers to produce it and these consumers to consume it, right? So I don't really mind about the price here. The price is just a transfer from consumers to producers. And as the benevolent social planner, I don't really have to worry about that. But what I'm noting here is that if I get this producer to produce, then we're losing something in terms of a cost here, but then we're gaining something as a value up here. So the total surplus is always going to be the area between the supply and the demand curve to the left of the quantity that we're producing. Okay, so I'm going to call this A. Okay, I'm going to call that whole area there A. And that is, here's our quantity, here's our total surplus. So at a quantity of Q1, our total surplus is A. Okay, let's pick a different quantity. Okay, now let's have a look at this second quantity here, which just happens to be the equilibrium quantity if we were looking at a market. Okay, and so we get a little bit of extra total surplus here, right? Because now these consumers are getting the good and they're being produced by these producers here. Okay, so now we've got this second area in here, which I'm going to call B. But remember that we're still producing and consuming the items up to Q1. We're just producing a little bit more now. So when we produce and consume quantity 2, total surplus is going to be equal to areas A and B. Okay, so this is better than Q1. Okay, we've produced some more stuff, and if you think about this, what we've done is we've produced some stuff. Might help if I have a different color here. We've produced some stuff and given it to consumers that have higher values than the costs of the producers that are making it. Right? We've generated some positive benefits from trade. Okay, now we're going to have a look at one more quantity here. And I need to have a better idea about how to use my OneNote. Okay, and let's pick our third quantity over here. Okay, well, if I wanted to produce this quantity, I would have to get these producers to produce it, right? That's going up the supply curve, and I'm getting these producers to produce when I want Q3, when before with Q2 I didn't get them to do it. Well, who would I give it to? Well, I'd give it to the consumers who have the highest marginal values out of the consumers who don't have an item yet, right? And that would be the ones down here. Okay, so this area here I'm going to call C, but what I want you to note here is that in area C, that's better. In area C, the costs, right, the supply curve, are all above the values, which is the demand curve. Okay, so this area C corresponds to a negative total change in total surplus. Okay, so if we produce quantity 3, we're still getting areas A plus B in our total surplus, but now we've asked some producers who are really high cost, right, these ones up here, to produce the good, and now we're giving it to consumers who have very low marginal value. So area C is negative, right? So out of these 3 options here, we'd prefer option 2, right? Option 1, we get A, but we also get A in option 2, and we get B. And then option 3, right, quantity 3 is total surplus that we get from option 2 minus something, right? C, we're subtracting C here because the benefits, right, the height of the demand curve, the benefits are less than the costs. Okay, so what we've worked out here is if we could produce and consume either Q1, Q2, or Q3, we'd want to produce Q3. Okay, sorry, we don't want to produce Q2, excuse me. But the question is, are there any other quantities? Is it just a fluke that in this situation, as I drew the graph, it happens to be quantity 2 that is also the equilibrium quantity, or is it that it's always going to be the equilibrium quantity? So let's start out with a fresh diagram and see what's happening here. Okay, so let's think about starting out with a particular quantity and asking if we were to produce a little bit more, will total surplus increase or decrease? Okay, if we produce a little bit more, then the cost of producing a little bit more is going to be on the supply curve just to the right of that quantity. And the value of producing that and allocating it efficiently is going to be just to the right of that quantity on the demand curve. Right? So at this point here, right, marginal cost is greater than marginal value. In fact, we can say that is the case for everything to the left of the equilibrium, right? The demand curve is above the supply curve everywhere to the left of equilibrium, right? So marginal value is greater than marginal cost. Okay, if we're thinking back to a rational person thinks at the margin, if the value of doing something, right, producing another good and allocating it efficiently, is greater than the cost, marginal value is greater than marginal cost, then you should keep doing it. Okay, so to the left of equilibrium quantity, total surplus must be increasing in this direction. Okay, what about to the right? Suppose that we produce this quantity. If we wanted to produce a little bit less, then, sorry, if we wanted to produce a little bit more, then our marginal cost is up here and our marginal value is down here. So total surplus, right, or in this over here, marginal value is less than marginal cost, so we want to do less of this, right? Our total surplus is decreasing in this direction. So what we want to do is produce less. Whereas over here, we wanted to produce more. Well, where's the only point where we don't want to produce less or more? That would be equilibrium. So the result we're getting here is that the market is going to maximize, sorry, more with an E, the market is going to maximize total surplus, remembering under those assumptions that we laid out in the first part of these 3 videos, right? That all benefits go to consumers and all costs are borne by the sellers. Okay, so this is a very powerful result, right? If those assumptions are correct, then markets are going to be a good way to organize things. Sometimes that's a big if, but if we can recognize situations where those assumptions are good or at least reasonably good, that can help us understand why we might want to have markets in those situations. Okay, so I'll leave you with that here. Thanks very much. I'm James Bland, and I'll see you later.